I really wonder sometimes why the Korean War was forgotten. But, that's how life is sometimes. Things just naturally get forgotten. But why was the Korean War forgotten? Because, America back in the 1950s was really informed because of Life magazine showing photos of the Korean War. You know what I mean? Today, I'm going to be talking about the Korean War and why it was naturally forgotten over time and how the American people were informed about it during that said time. But before I get into that you need to know some background context about, the build up towards the Korean Wars, which I'm just going to oversimplify really quick. So let's rewind to 1945. So it's late 1945, and World War II in Europe has just ended. And now the only last part of the war to be settled was the Pacific Theater, which America promptly ended by dropping the sun on Japan. Twice, obviously, because once wasn't enough, apparently. Okay, now the war is over. Good thing. That is a good thing. Now, we have to basically rebuild the world. So basically what happens is Marshall Plan in the western half of Europe, supported by America. America sends billions of dollars for the economic recovery of Europe. But the thing is, it was excluding the eastern half because Soviets were no, because they controlled the eastern half of Europe at the time. And they were like, nah, these are our people now. So you're not giving them any economic aid. We're rebuilding them. And, well, they kind of never did. I mean, they did somewhat rebuild, but nothing compared to the West. But the thing is, this isn't about the European side. If you guys want me to do a video on that, I'll do a video on that. Just let me know. But we're focusing on the Korean peninsula. So we're going to go over to Korea really quick. Quick oversimplification of the Korean War. You see, the Korean peninsula was split into two. And basically, the north was controlled by communists under the dictatorship of Kim Il-sung and was supported by the USSR. And in the south, it's an anti-communist regime supported by America. And the thing is, Kim Il-sung's dictatorship, he really wants to reunite the Korean peninsula under one dictatorship, his dictatorship, which is communist, which would really piss off America. But the thing is, he doesn't have the means to do so yet until Stalin gets nuclear weapons and gets cocky, and he was like, you know what, Kim, go ahead and attack South Korea. Here's some weapons, here's some ammo. And China did the same thing. They sent advisors to help train the North Koreans. And basically what happens next is Kim attacks South Korea, which catches the South Koreans off guard. And he takes Seoul in 3 days, which is lightning quick. And then through the coming weeks, he manages to push South Koreans to the southern eastern half of South Korea. And it's basically, that's where the South Koreans held for a little bit until America and the newly formed NATO arrived, basically. And 16 nation soldiers, 97 of which are American, by the way, land not in the safe zone with the South Korean troops, but actually just south of Seoul, and which is a huge risk, but it paid off because they pushed the North Koreans out of South Korea, and then push into North Korea. But now you got to understand who's in charge of this operation, which is General Douglas MacArthur, who's a total jackass of a general, by the way. He's a hero of the Philippines, but he's not really that good, in my opinion. But I'll talk about him in another video if you guys want that as well. But you got to understand, he assured the president that the Chinese would not intervene in the war. And I don't know exactly how the interaction went down, but this is how I think it went. Mr. President, I can assure you no Chinese forces will intervene in the Korean War. How can you be sure, General? Mr. President, I just got word that 500,000 Chinese troops have just entered Korea. Excuse me, what now? 500,000 Chinese troops have just entered Korea, Mr. President. What do you have to say about that, General? Nuke them commie bastards. What did you just say, General? I said nuke them, Mr. President. We have no choice. No, we do have a choice. We're not going to nuke the Chinese and start World War III with the Russians. But they're communists. Come on, Mr. President. No, end of discussion. Also, you're fired. What? It did consider a nuclear option against the Chinese troops, but seeing how Russians had nuclear weapons as well, they decided not to risk it. So China basically totally just wrecked the scale and pushed the American troops back to the 38th parallel, which is the midway point of basically North and South Korea, which was basically the original border as well. And that's where it stayed until the end of the war. There were only so many ways for the American people to be informed about the Korean War, one of which being Lifetime magazine. And one of the runners in the Lifetime magazine, a photographer named David Douglas Ducan, served in the Korean War. And this article about the Korean War called Seen Through the Camera Obscura by Huang Jung-hoon. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's really a masterclass article, and it really shows how the power of photography can change the perspective of a war. This photographer, David Douglas Duquesne, who I'm just going to call Douglas at this point, Douglas, he mainly focused on taking photos of the front lines. And this article basically gives his opinions of the front and the war overall. And honestly, like, it gives a lot of great background context of why this war happened and like how American people only saw one side of the story. The Korean War described by Douglas is essentially the first war of containment for the American side, because America didn't really want to kill communism immediately because that would bring disorder and chaos and potentially a lot of problems. They naturally just wanted to stop the spread of it, so naturally it would eventually die out like slavery would have done. Douglas took a lot of photos during the Korean War, many of which were on the front lines, showing the true aspects of what a soldier does for the American public. We see these soldiers like as peace protectors, basically, fighting for democracy. But at the same time, they're all human. And you can see like fear in their eyes, the focus, the overall just wanting to survive, just to live another day. These soldiers fought valiantly for protecting freedoms. And Douglas mentioned this a lot in the article because they were the true heroes, per se. Carl Maidane's, another wartime photographer, is also mentioned during this article. Carl Maidane's, he's more of a backlines troops, like behind the front type photographer. He captures the soldiers during their downtime and civilian aspects of the war. And you can see in these behind the front photos, you can see these soldiers basically just working with what they got just to have a bit of fun and like recoup before going back to the front, while the civilian side is trying their best to avoid the conflict, escaping across rivers just to save some time, even though it could lead them to getting severely sick and starving. There's also one other side that the article just it implied that the American public did not know about this last side, that being the Korean soldiers' side of the war, because hundreds of thousands of Korean men fought to protect their homeland. But the only photos I could really find of them were them helping American soldiers to medical tents. These men fought valiantly to protect their homeland and essentially what they deemed to be like their liberties as well. And the American people just had zero clue about it because they only cared about our side of the story, which is terrible because these men, they risked everything just for a better tomorrow. When the Korean War ended, it was essentially not, well, it didn't really exactly end. Like it did, but it more or less was an armistice. It was basically like a truce, because like there was a demilitarized zone afterwards, but nothing major. And so both sides could negotiate. Yeah. It's terrible the Korean War happened, and I see it as mainly forgotten because of other aspects like the Vietnam War, the war in Berlin. Well, not the war in Berlin, the Berlin Wall, which is essentially a kind of a war at that point. I would like to thank you all for watching. If any of you want me to talk about some other topics, let me know. Hey, Future Miles here. I forgot to mention one thing. I think the Korean War was mainly forgotten because of the other wars and technological advancements during that time, like the arms race, the space race, and then the wars like Vietnam War, the Berlin Crisis, Berlin Airlift, Soviets, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. There's just so much there, like that really impacts the Cold War. But I don't really want to talk about all that because that is not a part of this topic. But it's really a significant impact to why Korean War was naturally forgotten over time. Anyways, that was Future Me. Thank you. And I thank you for watching. Peace out.